Okay, so maybe we could get into the complementarity of different types, if we could. I'd
Mhm.
keen to ask you a bit about the mechanisms, different and common mechanisms that might be going on there. But just that thought um, of going to failure, that as a similar approach. So you've got similar conditions. Is there a matching of work done for the muscle? I presume if you're doing light loads, you're going to be actually doing more work overall. And so it might not necessarily be like for like, but the conditions in the muscle at the point of contractile, concentric exercise, I can't really move the weight to completion anymore. That's the common factor.
That is correct. So it doesn't have to be work match. So set on a
Okay.
set for set basis when you're matching set volume. But we do have some evidence that even when it's work matched, there is similar effects. So
Okay.
doing some more heavier load sets, there's less evidence of that. But the primary way we look at it is the number of sets you do. The amount of work is generally not considered as much in the field, um, because it kind of doesn't matter. You look at how many sets on a time basis. Now you could say it is somewhat less efficient to use from a time efficiency standpoint. A lighter load set is going to take you longer. If you're doing 30 reps versus 10 reps, and let's say your 10 reps is 30 seconds, you're doing let's say one up, two down, 1 second up, 2 seconds down. That's a 30-second set at 10 reps. It's a 90-second set with 30 reps. So there will be a greater time commitment in that respect.
Mm.
But uh, again, it doesn't mean you have. I'm just saying that the science does show that you have options in that regard. And yeah, those are considerations. If your lifestyle, if that extra time is going to be detrimental to your lifestyle goals, then that's something you need to weigh in a cost benefit and a risk reward.
So if there's a similar response in terms of muscle growth, muscle size, etc., is the differences in the routes to get to the top of that mountain? Are there different mechanisms at play, or are there common mechanisms that are at work whilst you're recovering, adapting, integrating new proteins into the muscle? Is that stimulated by the same pathways?
Yeah, it's a good question. There is some evidence that there are different pathways involved, different anabolic intracellular signaling pathways. Um, Mechanistic data is difficult to make sense out of in a lot of ways because you can see differences in pathways, and does that necessarily mean there will be a synergism if you're using different pathways? That let's say you target this pathway using this type of strategy and this pathway from using this type of strategy, so they will have a synergism and you get greater growth. It's possible, but we don't have good evidence that that's the case. We don't have good evidence it's not the case either. I'm saying that
Okay.
just because it might have, there might be different pathways, you can't necessarily take that to mean there will be a synergism. There is some speculation that there is differences in fiber type growth, so that there is some evidence that your type 1 fibers are more targeted through light load training, and that your type 2 fibers, your strength related fibers, are more targeted through heavy load training. And there's a somewhat of a logical basis to this because your type 1 fibers are more endurance oriented. So if you're using time, a light load that has a higher time under tension, it might be more conducive to type 1 fibers, and vice versa. Your strength related fibers, greater force capacity, they're more fatigable. Could your
Hmm.
higher force output required with heavier loads target them to a great extent? There is a few studies have shown that, but there's been other studies that conflict with that. So I'd say the evidence is still rather weak, although I wouldn't dismiss that as being potential. I would say this, that there's the potential for it to have benefit, in my humble opinion here. So there's a potential benefit of combining loading ranges. There's no tangible detriment
Right.
that that I can see logically or that we've seen in the literature. So I think it's a good strategy. This is where when I talk about practical recommendations, I'm giving you my opinion based upon what I know, what the literature shows, and also what uh, I'm using my own expertise in combination with logical reasoning to draw inferences. It doesn't mean that I might not change my opinion on that as we get more evidence down the road.
Right. Okay. And what that really opens up for me is variety and keeping athletes engaged, keeping coaches engaged, and being able to program with real creativity that challenges and stimulates. I think that that simple idea of adapting to a training load or the repeated bout effect, that you give the same thing to somebody and over time the body goes, yeah, maybe I'm not going to adapt to as much as I did before. Now, if you keep pushing and the training load is or the overall signal, that might make sense that you'll continue to get adaptation. But ultimately, you want to challenge the body. You want the body to be going, oh, that was tricky. And if you're going to do that again, I'm going to put new things in place and protect you. The whole principle of variety is so important to keep athletes engaged.
Yeah, and it also goes to the principle of progressive overload that you need to challenge your body beyond its present state, and like you're saying, with a novel stimulus. So how do you go about providing that novel stimulus? There's many. That's where the art of training comes in. So we have the science of training, which gives you perspective on com- comparisons of variables and how they might interact. But the art of programming is taking the science and then using your expertise. Because there are just so many different there are so many different interactions that you can't necessarily account for scientifically. And also just so many different ways to go about programming. Basically, there's a never ending or, virtually endless number of ways in which you can go about programming bodybuilding type style or powerlifting, any type of goal. But purely from a muscle building standpoint, we have, just think of the variables. We have frequency, we have load, we have volume, we have exercise selection, we have type of action, eccentric, concentric, we have tempo. It can go on. So there's just many, many variables. And then there are the interactions between these variables. So when you change one, you potentially change another variable. And how does that work? So do you then need to add more volume or subtract more volume or change the frequency? And
Mm.